Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Meet a Cheetah. Today's cheetah is Peter Warren. Peter, welcome.
Thank you.
So, you know the drill. We're going to start kind of from the beginning and go chronologically in order. So, before there's any story, who were you before? What were your interests? Did you have a job, etc.?
Well, I have to think back because it was long before, it was a long time back. I've been meditating since the mid 90s or so. Actually, even during the 70s when it was time for transcendental meditation, TM. Um, and I was in college and I was actually also studying Mahayana Buddhism with Robert Thurman, which got me really interested in the sort of philosophical aspects of Buddhism. And then that meditation got me interested in the experiential aspects, and that actually all went well. Um, I came back to meditation later in the 90s with Theravada meditation. There is a meditation center here in the greater Boston area that I joined in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. I started meditating fairly regularly at that point. Went on a fair number of retreats out at IMS here in the center of the state, Institute for Meditation. What is it called? Insight Meditation Society, sorry. So that all went pretty well. Also did a 3-month retreat even at the Forest Refuge out there, which is the sister organization, actually part of IMS, in the around 2010. Um, and I would say that during that whole time, I was aiming for something. I was aiming to awaken. I wanted to find that golden chalice at the end of the pathway. Um, so that was my goal. I was going to get there. I wasn't as much of a striver as I know some people are, but enough that I think that eventually did not serve me well. But the meditation was going reasonably well until sort of later in that second decade of the century. I got involved with Adyashanti, who had come out of the Zen tradition and then went off on his own. And he was all about awakening. He would say, I teach one thing only, it's awakening. Great, this is the guy for me. So I went on retreats with him yearly for about 7 years. Um, and did you want me to get into some of the adverse effects yet, or just the sort of before?
Well, I have a question about the awakening thing because I know for me at least, I got kind of drawn into meditation for sort of like basic mental health and well-being, and then somewhere down the road, I got sort of hijacked into thinking awakening was
Hmm.
the answer to everything. But it sounds like you maybe that was your goal from the beginning.
It was kind of, although never did I ever really understand what that meant. I have to say, even to this day, what the heck is awakening? I don't. If somebody said, really describe that for me, I don't know that I really could. Nobody, no teacher ever really took the trouble to explain that to me, what it is. It just sounded good. I mean, I kind of, people would say, okay, awakening to your true self, or, awakening to the true nature of reality, stuff like that. And that was close enough for me. I said, yeah, that sounds good. But
Don't you think there's some utility in being really vague about what awakening is? Because then you can just project your your hopes and fantasies onto this word and can mean almost anything, but it's pretty good marketing.
yes, exactly. I think, that's what I've come to understand, that it really is, it's vague by design, really. Um, and you can't really get too precise about something like that anyway. But you would also ask what other things about my earlier life were salient. And I've been a musician for most of my life, which is a very core thing for me. Um, and I would say, that meditation and music in a way, were the two major things in my life. And the two things where I drew most of my meaning. Um,
So I remember when we first met, which was I was giving a talk on meditation related challenges, and I believe that you said something about my statistical uh, approach. So you have some
right.
knowledge about statistics and analytics. Can you say a little bit about your professional training?
Right, that's true. Well, I was an electrical engineer to start with, from the early 80s on, and then in the around 2000, a new whole field started developing called bioinformatics, which grew out of the sequencing of the human genome. The Human Genome Project had all this data, and they said, "Oh, what does all this mean? I don't know, no idea." So they started bringing in engineers, mathematicians, statisticians, all of whom had to be taught some molecular biology. So they developed college programs, graduate programs, and I went back to Brandeis and got a master's in bioinformatics, which I absolutely loved. And I was in that field from the early 2000s to 2017 when I retired. I was working in a biotech company for half of that and also in an academic lab for the second half. Did a lot of software development for analyzing. This is all proteins for me. I won't get into that because I'll spend the entire time on just that. But looking for, okay, what proteins might be implicated in particular diseases was really what they want to know. So statistics gets into that a lot, and programming gets into that a lot. So that's really what I did for the last, yeah, 17 years, I guess that is. Retired, and what else can I say about that? So I learned something about quantitative data analysis, but your work was more qualitative, which is a new area for me. But I was close enough to it that when I came across your research and your papers at the time of and after that presentation that you gave, that 3-day workshop out of BCBS, early 2022, I said, "Oh, this is for me." I mean, I said a lot of things when I encountered this. That was one of them. So I knew that I was in my comfort zone from the sort of statistical area anyway.
Okay, so let's circle back to um, things were going well in your meditation. You were hell bent on awakening, whatever that was. And at some point, something changed. So,
Yeah.
how and when did things change for you?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of that time in the sort of I was mostly in the Theravada world up until I started working with Adyashanti and following him. Even during that period, I was still also going back and forth to Theravada. I never had serious problems with Theravada in the earlier times, but there was a particular retreat. No, actually, most of the retreats with Adyashanti were also pretty good. I really felt comfortable there, didn't have any problems. But in 2018, he did an online retreat, which is called, oh, I forget what it was called. Um, and what he did was, no, online is a weird way to do a retreat of that type. He was guiding us down, sort of as a guided meditation, down through what he called sort of layers of reality, down toward the most fundamental layer. I think he called it the fundamental ground of being, the numinous ground. He had words like that. And I remember him saying, when you get through that to that last membrane and you go through it, it's going to be a little scary. It's going to be a little frightening, but you'll be fine. You'll be great. You'll be down there for a while. You probably won't remember anything about it. And then at some point you'll come back up through and you will have, pulled all that up with you and all those kinds of words. And at the time, it felt a little strange. This isn't quite right. This is not like what I'm used to. But I didn't think too much more about it. And then, like a week later, I went on a regular retreat with him. And right away, from the beginning of that retreat, things had changed, I could see. So I now realize it happened during that online retreat. So what happened was a little subtle. During that regular retreat, all my sittings were totally blank, nothing going on. I'd close my eyes, all I could see is just the light coming through, my closed eyelids. That's it, no thought, no emotions, nothing going. And I remember writing, I saw in my journal, okay, maybe I should talk with him about this. This is weird, but I didn't. I don't know what would have happened if I had. Um, and then I went home, and within a week, strange things started happening. The most obvious of which was I started losing weight. And I lost a pound a week, then another pound, roughly about 1 pound per week for a year. And now I started about 205 pounds. I lost about 50 to 55 pounds over that period until I finally got that under control by literally forcing myself to eat more. Part of it was appetite, part of it was something else. The appetite, the amount that I was taking in was not less enough to explain that. But I had no explanation for that. And there were other symptoms that came in. There was depression, that was the main one, which I hadn't had since my teenage years. There was some dissociation. There was difficulty maintaining my body temperature. It would fluctuate a lot. Um, and most of, something that women of a certain age have been through, but men don't usually experience that. And now I have a lot more sympathy and understanding about that. Like hot flashes and feeling cold. Um, and then there was some certain amount of sort of emotional flattening that seemed really strange to me. Now, if you sort of I'm looking at that list and I'm thinking about, okay, now these don't seem related to each other at all. They didn't seem related to me. So I had no explanation for any of this. Now, of course, the weight loss gets the medical community very concerned, and my wife, of course, very concerned, and myself. And I went through whole batteries of tests, and everything came up negative, thank goodness. So they didn't find any cancer, which this is the first thing they thought. And we thought, nothing came up, nothing lit up. So I sort of was left with not knowing. I was in this wandering through this sort of wilderness of not knowing what's happened, but I thought, well, maybe I'll learn someday. And so that quest kind of settled down. That was now 2019, late 2019. And then I was again wandering through this sort of dark landscape for a few more years. And I went on my last retreat at the Forest Refuge, a 2-week retreat. In the middle of that retreat, and oh, by the way, I was continuing to meditate throughout, and all my sittings were getting stranger and stranger and more disconnected feeling. Then on this retreat in the middle, I had one particular sit where I closed my eyes and went down deeply. I don't remember anything about the experience. And I came back up after about an hour and a half into a full-blown panic attack. And my thought was, what? How can those two things happen one right after the other? That's just not possible. But it was. I mean, I couldn't ignore it. And this word kept going through my mind, and that was unsafe. Unsafe. Something really unsafe just happened. I have no idea what this is, but I knew then that was, I had to stop. That it felt unsafe. It felt dangerous. So I did stop, and I wandered around for several days, trying to decide, should I go home early? I didn't eventually, but it felt very strange for several days. Finally, that sort of settled down. Now, fortunately, this is the end of 2021, the end of sort of the pandemic. They were just reopening after the pandemic. And now, early 2022, you'll remember this, you gave your workshop with Jared out at the BCBS right next door. And somehow I came across that listing. And I said, this, I don't know what this is about, really. Varieties of contemplative experience, that's somewhat vague. Something about, somewhat challenging. I think the word challenging was in there. I just sort of thought, well, it could be interesting. Maybe I'll sign it. So I signed up and went out there, and I'm there dutifully taking notes as I do. And you and Jared were trading off and presenting your research from the VCE project. And I'm going, okay. And then you hit the part where you're talking about the symptoms that you settled on for, for the phenomenology, boiled down to 59 symptoms. And I'm writing down, oh, how about that weight loss, depression, dissociation, etc. And I thought, oh, also cognitive issues was another thing that I was going through, memory, all of it was in there. I thought, hmm, this is sounding very familiar. And I realized, I think I better find out more about this. Now, fortunately, you were right there, so I could talk with you offline at lunch, and you asked me to tell you more about my experiences, and I did. And you said, yep, you hit some adverse meditation experiences, definitely. And you had some thoughts about how that happened neurologically, which is great. And so I left that 3-day workshop, and I would say that was the beginning of my recovery, because finally I knew what had happened. And that, just to know what had happened and not have people all around you denying it, which is a whole other part of the story, um, was such, it was such a gift. So I started working with you and a few others on the care team. We had some sessions online throughout 2022. Now, and I started recovering more and more. And meanwhile, I went back to my meditation center in Greater Boston area, and I presented what had happened and started this initiative for coming up with a set of policies and procedures and guardrails to put in place to help their yogis that might be distressed. And as you might imagine, that was not met with the greatest open arms, although strangely they made it look that it was, but it was not. And particularly my main beloved teacher was the one that said, "Oh, this is so great. I really appreciate you bringing this up. What are you thinking we should do?" And okay, taking notes and everything. All right, well, that's great. We'll take that on. Okay, so I was very excited about that. I was on the board of directors there. I had been for like 6 years. And I had two, like, this is going to be one of my take homes. Find some allies, some trusted friends. And I was really lucky because there were two people on the board that were really deep friends and deep allies for me. Particularly, one of them knew about your research, so that was, that there was no heavy lifting there. The other one didn't know anything about this. But she trusted me. And she said, okay, I trust you. There must be something real here. Tell me more. So I sent her some of the research, and she learned more, and she became more and more supportive. She was the president of the board at that time. So I thought, this is great. I've got some real support. We can move this forward. And so the three of us put this together, along with another board member who had had his own adverse meditation experiences, it turned out. So the four of us put this together. We presented it in February 23, And this very strange thing happened. It was a board meeting. I won't go into the whole thing because it's kind of a story, but I'll just say the upshot was that we were told that this is great. We so appreciate you doing this. So appreciate you bringing this up. We'll take it from here, right? The leadership at the time, this teacher and other leadership. It wasn't just the teacher. And so we're kind of looking at each other over Zoom. Okay, well, I don't know. This seems a little weird, particularly since they had decided they were going to put board committees together, not to have us volunteer, which is always been the way before. They had decided who was going to be on these committees. None of us were on these committees. So that was the first strange sign we had. Um, I did say I was going to cut this short, but it's hard to because it's such an amazing part of the story. So I'll try to I think I'll stop that part at this point, except just to say there was this like building cognitive dissonance in me because their words were so in conflict with their actions that when I went home after that board meeting, I collapsed. I was dizzy. I had to lie down and I couldn't understand what was happening, but I knew something really strange and it had just happened and that I had this intuition, this is never going to go forward. Now, in time, I learned exactly that. It has not gone forward. It has been put on the shelf quietly. And a lot of the people who were on the board at that time, who were very supportive of this, have left. They're gone. The board has been essentially shrunken by about half. And that meditation center, partly as a result of this, has just been hollowed out. But the main thing, I have to tell this part of the story because now, is it all right to get into the institutional betrayal part, or should I wait on that?
Well, I just wanted to kind of circle back to, I mean, you came to your center as a board member to create these
Yeah.
new policies. But I think there might have been a piece before that where like you were actually reporting on your own experiences and asking for feedback or help.
Right.
And what happened there?
That's true. I missed. So yeah, I have this a little bit out of sequence. That was in relation to my beloved teacher, my formerly beloved teacher only. Um, it was about 6 months after you had given your presentation at BCBS, and I was pretty well on my way with recovery, but I went to this, my spiritual home still at that time, this meditation center. And I remember seeing the teacher there, and I said to her, let me tell you about what happened to me. I thought you might be interested in this. And I wonder if you have anything to say about this, any thoughts. So I went through what had happened and the symptoms that I came down with and developed, and that I learned that it was adverse meditation experiences. And she's sitting there nodding. And first of all, during this whole time, after this happened to me in 2018, I had been talking with her and telling her that strange things were happening. Over time, I told her reporting on this one and that one, and the depression, the weight loss, and she never really had much to say about it at that time. But during this 2022 meeting, oh, and she never told me, you really should stop meditating. This is, something strange is happening here. This isn't really safe for you. She didn't tell me that, and she didn't tell me that what I was experiencing was adverse meditation related. Now, in this 22 meeting, I found out she knew very well about adverse meditation experiences, and she knew about them back then. And the reason I know this is she told me this at that 2022 meeting. She said, oh, yes, we teachers know all about these. We talk about them all the time. I myself have helped out maybe 20 yogis at IMS on retreat who have run into trouble. I helped them out. Okay, well, that's interesting. All right, so you knew about this. You have some experience. So at that time, why didn't you tell? And you knew that this is what was happening to me, right? Yes, I knew that was what had happened. So why didn't you tell me this? And then there's just silence. And I couldn't get anything more out of her about this. And I went, wow, this is really strange. So I turned and I walked away. And really, that was the last interaction that started off in a friendly way with her. Never again was she my beloved teacher. Because that, I mean, talk about betrayal. I felt deeply betrayed because if she had told me in 2018 what she knew, that would have saved me 3 years of wandering in the dark, wondering what the hell had happened to me and why. She could have at least given me some guidance at that time. And I have never been able to get her to explain why. She just wouldn't tell me. So, yeah.
Do you think that she really did know what was going on? Or that she, once you kind of had all the information and you presented it to her, if she said, I never heard of that before, that would have made her look kind of stupid. So, do you think maybe she was just kind of saying that she knew that all along? Or where are you with this?
Well, it's interesting you say that because it has become what I've come to understand over time is there are two possibilities. One is that she really did know and she just neglected to tell me. Really purposefully is the only possibility since she says that she did know. And the other possibility, which you just raised, oh, maybe she didn't know. Yeah, and she realized that, okay, I've really put her on the spot here and said, okay, you say you knew, but you didn't tell me. Oh, and then, oh crap. But I can't go back and say, actually, I didn't know. Now, this is the thing about her that you have to know. She, and I have learned this from so many other people, she is unable to admit that she has made a mistake. She has never admitted she's made a mistake. She couldn't do it. So I think that's probably the most likely explanation. I think if she did know, she probably would have given me some warning or some information. She might have anyway. So yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. And because, okay, what's the problem with that? That's a lie. And if it comes out, if she admitted that no, actually I didn't know, and when I said that I did know, okay, that's a lie. She would have been caught in a lie. Now, as it turned out, she has been known to lie a lot. Other board members have told me this, and I've seen it myself, but that's something about some holes in her personality that are really deep. So I have walked away from that organization. I walked away from her. And for, several years, I had to really, really work on this and think, okay, can I bring myself to forgive her? Um, but I did not. I have not. And one reason why is that I realized that the anger and the feeling of betrayal that I was carrying around was actually serving me. It actually was helpful to me. That to some degree, hanging on to that anger was what kept me my agency. It was what kept myself together. I kind of had to do that. And that giving that up is kind of a Buddhist thing. Oh, you can't carry that around. That's just. And there's good reason for that too. I'm not putting that down. Sometimes anger can be destructive, but for me, it wasn't. It was shoring me up and it was getting me through this. And I kind of realized that. It might have even been due to things that I learned at Cheetah House. I think it was, maybe from you, that sometimes, also a therapist I've been working with, sometimes that's what's needed. Now, interestingly, I'll just say, as kind of an aside, maybe not, several weeks ago, all that just dropped. I, without any active act of forgiveness or anything like that, because I'm probably not going to be doing that. It just dropped. The anger dropped, and she just stopped renting out all the space in my mind. It just was, oh, okay. So now you'll still see, however, that anger arising a bit, more than a bit. So it's still there, but when I'm not telling the story, a lot of the time it's okay, it's mostly kind of just dissipated. Kind of let her go, let that place go. I will not be going back there. My allies have been told they are not welcome at this center anymore. Even the former president of the board, not really welcome to go there anymore. So that's, I say, okay, I think I'm done with that place. I'm done with this teacher. And I have other allies now. I mean, I still have these allies, but my community is now elsewhere. If it's anywhere, it's at Cheetah House, I would say, and my musical community. So kind of a blend.
So one of the terms or concepts that was very central to you was this idea of institutional betrayal. Do you want to say what that means to you and how it plays out for you?
So I guess that's what I have been describing about this meditation center and about her behavior in particular. I put that under the rubric of institutional betrayal. It's sort of it includes and encompasses that sort of gaslighting, the whitewashing, to some degree shaming. Like if you ran into this, you probably did this to yourself. I ran into some of that. Um, Denial and just being treated like, okay, I probably brought this on myself. And I'm not sure if we believe you anyway. So disbelieving is a big part of it. And sort of circling the wagons around themselves. So it wasn't just the teacher, it was like the whole leadership of the organization, where at this point I'm concluding, oh, they must have really talked amongst themselves and said, okay, we're gonna just sort of shut this guy out. So that's pretty much, I think, what the institutional betrayal is in the way that I'm using it. Institutional betrayal, yeah, there's some real betrayal there, but there might be some better words also that I'm not quite sure that I've found yet. Um,
Well, let me just say a couple things about what I know about institutional betrayal. One is that it comes from Jennifer Freyd, who does a lot of research on sexual assault and how victims of sexual assault are treated, which is universally not well. And there's a lot of gaslighting and victim blaming and denying and that kind of thing. But I think one of the essential features of institutional betrayal is that it's not just any institution, it's an institution whose entire mission and identity is to be helpful, to help people,
yes,
and that we we trust them. We trust, you know, and that trust is lost in the institutional betrayal,
yeah,
because they did not handle, claims of harm appropriately. And that list can go on and on and on. There's actually an institutional betrayal scale that includes, like, they didn't believe me, they, told me it was something else.
Hmm.
They made it easy for these types of problems to arise. They made it difficult to report. They didn't do anything to rectify the situation. So things like, I mean, again, these are coming from the sexual assault literature, but it sounds like, you hit every nail on the head there. And then the other literature, which I think is really relevant and to some extent explains a lot of your like when you came home and you're like, I couldn't breathe and you're like, what is happening to me? There's some literature by Alexander Stein. She wrote, I think it's called Terror, Love, and Brainwashing.
Mm.
But she basically, kind of linked together the issue of institutional betrayal and disorganized attachment. And basically, disorganized attachment is when your main caregiver, your refuge, is also a source of threat. So this happens a lot
Mm.
with, if you have an alcoholic parent and like sometimes they're loving and caring and reliable and sometimes they're scary and you just don't know who you're going to get. And so when you have disorganized attachment, your nervous system is like your approach system, which is like, oh, this is my safety, this is my refuge, this is where I go to. And if you've been part of a meditation center for decades, that's obviously a refuge. And so you
Hmm.
have your approach system on, but then when that same refuge starts to be attack you or threaten you, then you also have your runaway, fight or flight, flee system on. Those two systems are not supposed to be on at the same time. And so your body's like, am I approaching or am I running? I don't know.
Mm.
And then, it's going to be, you
Mhm.
become extremely disorganized because you don't even know which system to rely on.
Mm.
So, anyway, that was just some of the thoughts about
Yeah.
institutional betrayal and how it sort of fits your story.
Yeah, that I think describes it pretty well. Describes my feelings that came up at that time also. I think one of the other aspects of the institutional betrayal that I haven't quite talked about is, although it's implied, since they refused to go ahead with putting any of these guardrails in place, any of these policies and procedures, what that really means is not just about me. Any distressed meditator that comes through those doors is not going to be helped. There's not going to be any system in place, any structure to help people out, which is what we were trying to put in place. How, first of all, put some warnings in place, some cautionary text would be a good way to start, and some information to meditators. Okay, here's what to do if you find yourself into trouble. Here's what to look for. Here are things you can do to soften things, mitigate things. Talk to your teacher, all the sort of trauma sensitive mindfulness things as well. We had sort of many of those things in there. Um, and even if the harm did not happen at this center, which is not a it was not a residential retreat center, but they do have weekend retreats. So a lot of the time, what I've seen is meditators coming through after being on a retreat at IMS, which is kind of a sister organization, a week long or 2 week or a month or whatever, and they come back to this organization broken. Well, it's not the right best term to use, damaged, really having run into some real serious problems, and they will not be really getting much help there. So there's nothing in place. One of the things, by the way, that we had proposed that they should put in place to help these meditators out is what do they call it when they let's see, a particular term for the kind of consent, informed consent. We proposed informed consent, and when I remember, I told the executive director, we want to do this. This is probably the first thing we should do, informed consent. And when I proposed that to her, it was really interesting what happened. Instantly, she said, "Oh, we don't have to do that. We're a religious organization." And I was so stunned by that and by the instantaneous response that I didn't have the presence of mind to say, you mean legally or do you mean ethically? You're not required. And I wish I had thought to say that, but the instantaneous part is important here because it says, oh, they've been talking about this. They worked this out, and they worked out that that's going to be their response. And I thought, well, that's okay. So that's to me is a big part of the institutional betrayal is the betrayal of the other meditators coming through those doors that will not be getting support and will not be getting information.
So why do you think that that was the response? I mean, creating informed consent about the range of effects that meditation can have, and a list of some resources, and if you run into trouble,
Hmm.
doesn't seem like a big deal. It doesn't seem like a heavy lift to me. Like, what's the problem? What and we've talked a lot about this, and that, like, this is not just the center. This is everyone we've ever talked to is
Yeah.
kind of doing this. So why do you think they're doing that?
Well, I guess, I mean, the way I assume what it really means is they are just afraid to say anything explicitly that calls into question the safety of their beloved practice. And asking for informed consent kind of does. It kind of implies, even if you would say nothing else, there's some risk here. This practice is risky, it's potentially dangerous. It might not be for everybody. And they're not ready to take that step.
I call it maintaining the pristine category. So, like,
Yes.
making sure that whatever it is, the teacher, the center, the practice, the Dharma, it is perfect and infallible.
Hmm.
And if it isn't, then your entire life is, you know, up for questioning. And that's a
Yes.
pretty threatening thing.
Yeah, it's called into question. And I think that I can sort of get that, although it still makes me, yeah, bristle. Yeah.
So let's pivot and talk about, where you are now, and like how do you recover from this? What does your recovery sort of trajectory look like? What were the main turning points and lessons? Yeah.
Okay. Um, I think, as I mentioned earlier, probably the real initial turning point was learning what had happened to me. Just education, just find, oh, this can happen. Wow, really? Okay, it can happen, and it did happen. Okay, now I know where these symptoms came from. And then I started learning about some of the neuroscience behind this and some of the research that you all had done. And it all started clicking because that's kind of the way my mind works. I like understanding things at that level and learning some of the mechanisms for how adverse meditation experiences can happen, what can happen in the brain, what are some of the changes. And okay, that now makes more and more sense. The more sense that it made, the more I feel like my recovery was progressive. It was like each new piece of information was kind of another step. The other big one, though, I would say, was just connecting with you and with others on the care team, and starting some counseling sessions with you and others. And that really helped. Learning about what at that time we were calling resourcing. Now we're calling, it's been sort of reformulated into scaffolding, which has been very helpful all the way along. I would say that's probably a main one for me, the scaffolding in reconnecting myself with myself and rebuilding the connections to things that bring reassurance, that are nourishing, and bring pleasure back to my life because that was lost for me. So that was a big thing. That was a big deal for me to be reconnecting to that. Another big thing was finding friends and loved ones who were trusted friends and loved ones and allies, my wife being the primary one, partly because she had been through all this with me and it had a huge impact on her, as you can imagine. But through it all, she supported me all the way. It was quite incredible. And several friends, sometimes it may just be a few friends, but for me, I was lucky because these two allies on the board were already friends and they were deeply in the middle of this with me. Um, yeah, so friends and allies was another big thing. And then just continuing to work with Cheetah House. Then at some point, I was asked if I wanted to be on the care team. And I thought about that, not for a long time, I have to say, because for some reason, by the time that I was asked that, I was already thinking, I would love to do this for other people. I think that I might be able to provide a little support for some people, because, I've been through a certain amount myself. And I would say, as I mentioned to you earlier offline, that for a while I didn't quite realize that I had what it takes, but you did, and you saw something in me that I wasn't ready to see in myself yet. It took me a while. And the fact that you saw it and that you asked me would I like to do that was also a huge factor to me in my recovery. Just that trust, that, you know, um, that sort of, that again helped me connect back to parts of myself that had been alive before all this happened. Things, that I knew about myself and capabilities that I knew I had, but that I had lost and forgotten about. So, yeah, that was a big one. Let me just check my notes. I think I might have even had a few more. Oh, just, friends, allies, loved ones. Not all those people are going to be on your side, I found, but I was very fortunate. To have a wife that was solidly behind me. And my sister, too, was a big supporter and always gave me unquestioning support. So finding community, finding your allies and friends was a really important part for me. And also, the final thing I'll say is just all the training that the care team members go through and that I went through that you provided was also a really important part of the recovery, even for me, because as a science adjacent, I learned, this is how this works. This is how things can go off the rails, and that every bit of that, since I love science so much, every bit of that research and what came out of that was a part of this recovery, really, for me.
So one of the purposes of the Meet a Cheetah series is so that people who are thinking about maybe doing some work at Cheetah House and trying to get to know different care team members and which one to choose. That's why we have these Meet a Cheetahs. So there's a long form that they can kind of get to know each person. So with that idea in mind, how is Peter, what's the Peter action figure? What makes you different than other people on the care team? What types of clients do you really like to work with? What kind of issues?
Okay. Well, I mean, I like to work with a wide range of people. I think there are a few things that I'm a little less comfortable with, but like OCD, psychosis are not as strongly in my sort of wheelhouse. But many other things I'm getting more and more comfortable with. And I would say probably maybe one of the main differentiators is the experience with institutional betrayal. And I've already talked with a client who had where that has been an issue, and that it turned out to be that's why she chose to work with me. And I think I was helpful. I hope so. Um, I think also I'm an older person, so I have a fair amount of experience, long time meditator, but also experience in other things. Musician also, so I think I may have put that into the bio. I hope I did. That the importance of creative outlets and how important that can be. I actually didn't mention this earlier when you're saying what was important to my recovery. Music was definitely important. Playing music, even just listening to music, but that musical outlet, playing the music, creating it, was really important. Um, I gotta say, because I'll forget if I don't say it now, it wasn't quite an answer to your last question, but one of the important things that I learned about was the importance of just, um, stop spending so much time introspecting and turn that attention out. And sometimes that will involve a certain amount of, um, no, I forget what the word was. It's obvious. Distract. Distract yourself. Don't worry about it. It's not the best word. It's obviously pretty negative, especially for meditators. But I have come to keep it close to my heart that I found is really important as a way to short circuit rumination and, wouldas and shouldas and coulda, um, and just move on. Go about your day. Moving is important. So all of that. So I don't know if that really, let's see, to circle back to the question, I guess that's part of it too, that I maybe can offer people is help them with the distraction. Okay, find out what is distracting for you. What do you find helpful in short circuiting your own rumination? Can I help you find that?
Well, it sounds like between distraction and embracing anger, um, you know,
Yeah,
that's some pretty heavy, like, I don't know, my Buddhist super ego is going like this,
yep,
so um, there might be some pieces where doing what you've been told and, taught for decades to do the complete opposite, sort of violate those rules and norms and values. Um,
yeah,
that's hard.
yeah. Yeah, I would have to tread cautiously there, I think, with clients, because I know, how I felt about those things when I was deeply in it.
So we're going to come to the end pretty soon, but I just want to give you any kind of like bird's eye view, last, anything that you want to say, at the end to just kind of take homes.
Oh, let's see, what do I have? I think, a lot of these I had sort of sprinkled throughout the discussion, but maybe I'll sort of try and bring them together. One of them is find your community if you can, and if that turns out to feel like too heavy, like it's another obligation, just, back off from that and just say, okay, where's my friend, that one friend that I can trust to tell them about this? If you can find one person at least that you can trust and that trusts you, that gets you a long way toward that. Again, moving, dancing, maybe being a little playful, and if there's a creative outlet that you have, leaning on that. Again, a lot of this is outward focused rather than the internal focus that we've had for so long meditating, the interoception. If there's this, I've been in some of this, I've only been finding out recently, by the way, the importance of that outward focus. and allowing myself to just distract myself. I put on music in the morning when I get up, and it's made such a big difference. It's unbelievable. Um, so let's see if I have any other takeaways. Yeah, find your resources. Try some resourcing, some scaffolding, maybe self-scaffolding, or joining a scaffolding session with someone on the care team. Very helpful. That's been very helpful to me, scaffolding. Um, and the converse of finding a community is don't be afraid. If there are people that shun you or shame you or belittle you, cut them loose. Don't be afraid, or cut yourself loose from them. It's okay. You'll find friends that are better suited, allies. They're not really your friends anymore. It's okay. I think one other thing I should say that is that I found important to recognize is that, um, this is going to be part of a short list. I would say to anyone, you're not alone. You didn't cause this, and you will recover to a large extent, maybe completely. I mean, in the world of science, asymptotically. So it might, like level off to some degree, but I would say I'm like in the very high percentage of recovered at this point, and I'm happy with that. Um, where was I heading with that? I'm very distractible. I distract myself. Um, I know this was it. So, having said you will recover, what I've learned is that you may not recover back to where you were before. That it's okay to recognize that this whole experience of the adverse effects and the recovery from that may have shifted you over to here, a slightly new place, a new landscape. And you may mourn the loss of some of that. I do sometimes. I mourn the loss of some of the things that meditation gave to me, but I won't say substitutes, I find other things that, like scaffolding, for instance, resources and new friends and music that bring me um, joy and groundedness over here. It may be a slightly different place. And I've come to the point where I say, that's okay. I don't have to be back here where I was. This is this is what the reality is now, and it's a good place. So find your new good place. It may not be the same as the old good place. And that's okay.
That sounds like a good place to stop. All right, well, I'm going to open it up for questions.
I do have some thoughts about that. Um, it's interesting. I had puzzled about that for a long time. I knew that this had happened, but I didn't quite know why. And I knew that it happened there. It happened at that point. So I could focus it down. Okay, something happened down there. And I learned, my therapist that I've been working with, somatic experiencing therapist, had a really interesting way to put it. She said, normally, if somebody's doing a guided meditation that's that deep, that's that, um, sort of kind of non-dual and whatnot, it often or normally, if it's a retreat, would be in person. This was not. This was a teacher who was talking to possibly thousands of participants, guiding all of them down into this place. And what the therapist said to me really clicked. She said, he might have had the skill to bring you down through that, but he may not have been willing or able to safely get you back out. The key word being safely. And I think when she said that, I said, I think that's it. I really do. Yeah, he couldn't keep us, he didn't, or he couldn't keep us safe. Because that's some serious stuff. That's a dangerous territory. And I think if you did have a teacher in person that could really monitor what's going on, maybe it would have been safer. I don't know. Good question. I don't know that I can answer that. That would be somewhat of a speculation on my part, but I do think that it kind of feels like I had invested so much of myself in the trust in these teachers and their teachings that when it went awry, I was not prepared to say, hey, you did something wrong. I
Mhm.
mean, for quite some time, I wasn't prepared to do that, I think. Um, so I
Yes.
think there is something about that. It does sound like it might have something to do with this disorganized attachment, that I had attached myself to these teachers and I believed in them and I believed in the truth of what they were teaching and the validity of their practices and the safety. I never even questioned the safety. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of my take on it. Your last comment, this is something I got to say. I'll try to keep this very short, but it's a really fundamental part, and I think you put your finger on it. Um, if teachers in the West were prepared from the beginning to recognize some of the risks and dangers of meditation and to bring meditators along with that, along with their other teachings. Say, oh, by the way, there are some things that can happen, and here are things to watch out for. If that had been a part right away from the beginning, then the practice itself would have been made safer quite a bit. Like all the work that Peter Salguero has been doing in the research into meditation sickness going back centuries and centuries in the sutras that have been found in Asia that have never been translated into English. What are the chances, right? And yet, that decision not to translate those by the people establishing meditation and Buddhism in the West, that decision not to include those is coming back to bite them. If they had allowed it, so, oh yeah, this is just a normal part of meditation. Sometimes it has some risks. Great, people would be prepared, and it would just be a normal part of the practice. And now it's like, this is what we have. That decision has caused this unbalanced situation. Just had to say that because I thought that what his work is just remarkable. Really, I mean, for one thing, I only had contact with him during retreats, which there were several hundred people attending these week-long retreats, and no
Yeah.
contact with him in between. So I didn't ever really talk with him directly. Willoughby has talked with him, interestingly. But yeah, I don't know what that would have been like if I had. I don't know if I would have even had the nerve to bring that up with him.
I'll just add one thing about the Adyashanti organization, and this is true of many organizations, is that one approach is to basically say that anything that happens in the context of meditation is part of the awakening process. That's a very easy way to be like, this is not a problem. It's another way to maintain the pristine category. But Adyashanti's, he wrote a book called The End of Your World, which is basically like your awakening process is going to explode the world as you know it, end it, and that's what's supposed to happen. So I don't think if if you had managed to get in touch with Adyashanti, he probably wouldn't have been like, "Oh no, you're losing weight. Like we should stop meditating." He wouldn't have
Right.
seen it as an adverse effect. He would have seen it as part of the process. So,
Right. Right.
Well, can I come in? Sorry, Wendy. I don't know how to put my mechanical hand up. Peter, thank you so much. I'm amazed at your courage to be able to say and express yourself, and I work with you, so it's really beautiful. It was Revolution of Being. That was the Adyashanti retreat, and it was a retreat I was on. I'm a peer supporter at Cheetah House. I work with Peter. I was on the same retreat. We didn't know each other back then. We didn't know that was certainly the beginning of my crisis. It unraveled me. That was the beginning of the unraveling, because that was the precursor to waking up with severe tinnitus. Was just after that retreat. It was just deep. Those meditations were hours. And so thank you for highlighting that in such a kind and generous way. And
Yeah.
I think what I do appreciate about what you said is that maybe you don't go back to the way you were before. That there is recovery, but it's not necessarily the same person you were before. I feel that, but I do feel that there's been such benefit and beauty from that. So thank you for that, Peter.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, and I can't stress enough how important that is to just say, all right, I'm kind of this new person to some degree. I'm not back where I was. I'm probably not going to be back there, and that's okay. It's okay. So I was not still working. I had retired 1 year before all that happened, so I didn't have that complication. As far as what I thought about awakening at the time, I think the closest I could get to it then is I thought, well, it's probably mostly about not self. It's probably, awakening to the true nature of the self as being beyond this. I remember being on retreat once and I was in a shower, stepping out of the shower, and I thought, oh, this is what it's like to not be Peter. And I'm in there going, woohoo, I'm on the way. I think that feeling went away, but that's probably as close as I got at that point. So I was thinking, okay, that's a good enough, explanation for me at that time. My day. And if either of us come up with a better word for distraction, well, let's let the other know. I wish I knew because it's not distraction. It really isn't. It's something else.
how about
And
intentional reallocation of attention? A little long,
let's
but
make an acronym out of that.
yeah.
Yes, intentional.
And we should end now because it's on a high note, but I did want to actually circle back and ask you something which I don't think you actually mentioned. And it's sort of Janina's question about awakening sort of reminded me of it, which is, Peter, do you still meditate? And
Oh,
is awakening still on the table for you as a goal?
oh, okay. You're right. That should be addressed. And I had not. I do not still meditate. For a couple of reasons. One, for some time after those events, after that last meditation and the panic attack, it really didn't feel safe for probably a year or two after that. And then I sort of stopped thinking about it for a while. And then when I was out at IMS, because a friend of mine is on staff out there, some stories there. And I was also dropping my wife off for a meditation retreat because she does still meditate. And I came to terms with that in a positive way, I would say, which is good. Um, I was out there and I was walking through those meditation halls at IMS. And I asked myself, do I miss this? Because I know for a long time, I think I sort of did. I had the image of being there in that space walking back and forth. I loved the forest refuge. I loved, you know, I mean, it's just an absolutely beautiful place. And so from afar, I had this idea in my mind, yeah, I really miss that. I love that space. Then interestingly, being back in it, I looked around and I asked myself, do I miss this here? Would I want to be back in this meditating? And it was like the answer came back like that. Really not. I'm really not drawn to this anymore. And it didn't even feel like a stretch. It didn't feel like I was forcing myself to take that position. It just felt completely natural and a real certainty to me that that was no longer part of my life and I don't want it to be a part of my life. So, about awakening, same thing, really. I mean, especially if awakening has anything to do with not self. What I know about not self now, no, thank you. Really not interested. I think normal life, with some nice positive distractions, that's really kind of what I'm after. And personal connections, you know. I don't know if that answers the question, but
Okay, I think we can end now.
all right.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank
Um,
you.